Our reading today comes from the novel The Remains of the Day, a winner of the Man Booker Prize by author Kazuo Ishiguro. Naturally, and why should I not admit this, I have occasionally wondered to myself how things might have turned out in the long run. I only speculate this now because in the light of subsequent events, it could well be argued that in making my decision, I was perhaps not entirely aware of the full implications of what I was doing. Indeed, it might even be said that this small decision of mine constituted something of a key turning point. That decision set things on an inevitable course towards what eventually happened. But then I suppose, when with the benefit of hindsight one begins to search one's past for such turning points, one is apt to start seeing them everywhere. What would have transpired, one may ask, had one responded slightly differently, and perhaps occurring as it did around the same time as these events? Each one of us lives a double life. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. We live the life our friends and families know we live, the one we go about leading each day. And we live the life we thought we should live, or even the life we might have lived, the life created from our alternative choices or circumstances. And both of these lives exist side by side, the embodied life and the imaginary one. I was driving in the car the first time I heard it. I hadn't been a fan of Bjork's. She'd always seemed too bizarre, too real for me. Both her music and her choices in clothing. I mean, all you have to say is swan dress, and everyone is instantly taken back to her 2001 Oscar dress. But there I was, driving around with an infant who was attached to my hip at all hours of the day, screaming as though she had suffered some egregious indignity the moment I left her eyesight. Sleep had become an old friend I remembered with fondness. My postpartum anxiety was nearing debilitating. The days when I could decide on a moment's notice to go see a movie in a dark theater by myself, my go-to self-care for years, was long gone. What I would have given for 5 minutes of silence. Glorious, merciful, soul-sustaining silence. It seemed more and more frequently that I had to remind myself of how I had begged and pleaded with the universe for this child. Years of trying, doctors, tests, medications, gallons of tears, and wishful thinking, and now I simultaneously wanted to hold her tightly to my chest for the rest of my life and pull out my hair and hand her to the next stranger that walked by. An article in The Guardian by Lucy Jones entitled, "As She is Born, Part of Me is Dying," sums it up saying, "Even when we are not in the same room, I think she is with me. I notice she has her own smell and I am surprised that it is not the same as mine. When I close my eyes, I see her. I hallucinate her face in the wooden blinds, in the faces of the Queen or Dominic Cooper, Vince Vaughn, Yoda. I am melting into her, and she into me. Hours morph into one another. The walls and days are porous and interchangeable." She asks, "Will I ever be unsplit again?" "Will I ever be unsplit again?" Jones asks. How many of us have felt that way before? As though we are split down the center, half of us here and half of us somewhere else. Half of us still the person we used to be, and half of us the person that we have become. In British psychoanalyst and essayist Adam Phillips's book entitled Missing Out, in Praise of the Unlived Life, he writes that the paths we don't pursue in life are a crucial dimension of our lived experience. Our unlived lives, the lives we live in fantasy, the wished-for lives, are often more important to us than our so-called lived lives, he writes in his prologue. We can't imagine ourselves without them. Phillips believes that our core identities, how we view ourselves, include our imaginary lives. Recall standing in front of a mirror and saying, wow, when did I get this age? I feel 15 forever. So our identities are not based purely on the facts of who we are, but upon our perception of who we could be. Perhaps even more interesting is when he shares that the life that doesn't happen is actually crucial to interpreting our experience of the one that does. We've all heard the argument, we wouldn't know hot without cold, or joy without suffering. Phillips's argument is along the same lines. How could we interpret or make meaning of our real life if we did not have an imaginary one as well? And so in this way, he determines that we may need to think of ourselves as always living a double life. The one that we wish for, and the one that we practice. Interestingly enough, my friend Bjork came to this conclusion years ago. And I was driving that day, and as I was driving that day, so did I. I heard the opening lines of the song Hyper Ballad. We live on a mountain right at the top. There's a beautiful view from the top of the mountain. Every morning I walk towards the edge and throw little things off, like car parts, bottles, and cutlery, or whatever I can find lying around. It's become a habit, a way to start the day. I go through all of this before you wake up, so I can feel happier to be here with you. Admittedly, it's not the most poetic of songs, but like any good piece of art, there are a multitude of potential meanings. To me, it's about a woman having to remind herself how dangerous the world is by throwing things, delicate things, off of her cliff and watching them shatter. All so that she could remember to be thankful for the life that she has, even if the life she has isn't always perfect. She feels ashamed to need this reminder, ashamed to say it out loud or share it with her loved one, evident in her facilitating the ritual while her partner sleeps. This plays out in our own life as well, just perhaps not quite so dramatically. It was during those difficult moments, the ones where my child was moving into her third hour of screaming, when my mind would drift towards the image of myself sleeping in on a Saturday morning, sprawled out in my bed rather than the uncomfortable mattress on the floor in her room, imagining how it felt to bask in the lack of bony knees or elbows pressed uncomfortably into my side. But that free-spirited existence was not my life. This wild, strange, wonderful creature was here instead. I needed to remember the ache I had for her before she was inside of me, the one that felt like she was calling to me through time, pulling me at an agonizingly slow pace, never knowing if I'd ever see her. That was my cliff to throw things off. I used to chide myself for my imagined life, though I never believed it would have been better, just different. You see, there's a guilt to having these moments that even now leaves me feeling vulnerable admitting them. I'd ask myself, was it okay to grieve the woman I no longer was? Or even the woman I would have been if I remained childless? Did it make me an awful mother, an awful woman, an awful partner? Or just a realist, a human being? I'm not a gambling person, but if I was, I bet that Bjork and I are not the only ones who have experienced moments in our lives where we are caught between two worlds. The world of what if and the world of but now. For you, it might be asking yourself, what if I took that trip to Paris like I always wanted to? What if I never broke up with my high school sweetheart? What if the car accident hadn't happened? Or what if I'd finished my college degree? The world and each life in it is filled with these what ifs. And it's incredibly human to reflect on these intersections of your life. To picture how your world might have been different had you only made a left turn rather than a right one. If we are at a point in our lives that is particularly difficult, it's easy to use this second life fantasy as a form of escapism. To pretend that we might have been happier, richer, healthier, if only we'd turned left. And we can hold on to that fantasy and say, one day I'll change my life and I'll live this fantasy rather than the life I'm living now. And if we're feeling happy about our lot in life, this second life might suddenly become less appealing. We might remember the intersections of our past and conclude that actually we would have been disappointed or hurt or worse off somehow if we'd chosen to turn right. As Phillips said, reflecting on our past and what-ifs are a way we make meaning from our real lives. We do so by rationalizing our situation for better or for worse with language like, well, if I didn't make that decision then, I wouldn't be where I am now. Or, it seems as though my whole life has been leading towards this. I've said this phrase many times in my life, and I bet you have too. Quantum physics suggests that we live in a world with infinite possibilities, or we live in infinite worlds of varying possibilities. As a human, you were born to manifest a life from infinite possibilities. At each step along the way, you create history by deciding which possibility to explore and working your way through that action. You choose to create the experience from the potential and make it manifest. In other words, each minute of our lives is filled with hundreds of choices, and even the slightest change creates a new reality. And as fun as it can be to live out those infinite worlds in our fantasy lives, the truth is we simply don't know what they would be like in reality. That's what makes them fun. We don't know the outcome of each decision that we make, or that we didn't make. We can only wonder and assign it meaning based upon our own hypotheses after the fact. What moment in your life do you return to frequently and wonder, what if? Do you allow yourself to reflect deeply on this person you will never be? This alternate reality Ronald, or upside down Debbie? Do you think of this person with fondness, with contempt, with disappointment? Do you come back to the image of this person frequently? While our imaginary life is crucial to our lived one, it's important it doesn't interfere with the joy we can find in the here and now. That it doesn't take away from us more than it gives to us. So while you can visit your second selves, perhaps don't build a house there. There comes a point in our lives where our second self ceases to be a potential reality, where we fully know we will never be a successful author or a parent, or that we will never live in Fiji or direct an Oscar-winning movie. And when that moment comes, because it always does, it can feel sudden, like someone just knocked the breath from your lungs. When it happens, most of us learn eventually to accept the true reality, while putting at least a portion of our second selves, a portion of our imaginary life to bed for good. But how do we move past the grief we experience when considering the life we did not live? We all know that grief looks different to each of us, but I think we can safely begin by addressing the stigma surrounding our imaginary lives. I'm thankful that in this faith and in this church, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be who you are without needing to wear a mask and pretend. So if we extend that attitude into our inner lives outside of this church, we can begin to accept that we are multifaceted human beings with both good and evil, beauty and ugliness, forethought and spontaneity, success and failure, a lived life and an imaginary one, all wrapped up into one. And we learn to love ourselves because of our complexity. If you're open to self-reflection, if you are accepting of moments that defy societal expectation, you can allow yourself to grieve the decisions you didn't make, or perhaps the ones you did, and start the path towards accepting your life for what it is in this here and now. Even better, taking your fantasy life and integrating it into your lived one. Perhaps it's less about the circumstances of your fantasy life and more about who you are internally. Are you braver, sillier, healthier, funnier, more generous in your fantasy life? How can you integrate that into your real life? Perhaps that's why I never enjoyed Bjork before. She seems so comfortable in her weirdness. Comfortable enough to wear a swan dress like a boss. She didn't care about what others thought, a woman seemingly living in both her fantasy life and her real one. And that real-life example of integration can be scary when you're not there yet in your own life. Now that I'm older, and I certainly pretend that I'm wiser, I feel empowered by her weirdness. It makes room for my own. It feeds my soul to be genuinely me. And in that way, perhaps I've begun to integrate the most needed parts of my imaginary life into my real one, making me a whole person, lending significant value to my imaginary life, taking the stigma away. So next time you find yourself at your cliff, needing to remind yourself of how good you have it, reminding yourself to be grateful for the life you do have, go ahead and throw things off. No need to feel guilty about it. It's the work of your core identity. It's how you live a good life. Just don't stay in the imaginary world too long, or you'll risk missing out on your real one. Amen.